There are many arguments on what could be the coolest stone ever found. The Rosetta Stone. I don't know. There's a great stone. A lot of Jerusalem great stones. There's even a book out on all the best stones in Yerushalayim, in Hezekiah's tunnel. Lots of interesting stuff going on there. However, I think that this stone is very special, and I wanted to share some of the things that are special about this stone. And we'll start with the simple, and we'll finish with the more amazing. But it never stops being amazing. So I'm guessing that many of you are familiar with the stone itself, and it is a stone that was found in the Golan and today can be found in the museum in Katsuri, the Archaeological Museum. If someone has their mic open, you might want to mute yourself there. Although I can't see who that is, so I trust you. Okay, so let's talk about where it was found. It was found in a place called Dabura. And it's a name that has a lot of background to it. Most Israelis know it because it's a very well-known hiking tour, hiking path. And Israelis don't know it as Dabura, even though one official name of this riverbed is Nahal Dvora or Nahal Dabura. Everybody calls it Sheila Boone. And it's very well known because it has great pools for swimming, as you can see down below here. These folks who are trying to tread water, and beautiful waterfalls, and of course the main attraction, it's free. And it's relatively accessible, not far from Katsrin. You can actually get there, almost there, by public transportation. You can start, go to a waterfall and come back, or you can do the whole thing all the way down to the Jordan. So this is the waterfall known as the Sheila Boone waterfall. Sometimes you'll see it on the map as Gilbon. They're trying to make it sound Hebrewish, even though nobody uses that name. I've never really heard it. This is the first waterfall, which most people don't even see, and certainly don't swim in, although it's possible. And this is called Mapal Dvora because of its proximity to the village known as Dabura. So yes, that's a picture of Yoni. Let's talk about the name. So in the Torah, there's a number of cities of refuge that are mentioned, and one of them is Golan. The name of the city is Golan, and it's in the Bashan. Now, today we use the word Golan for the entire area, but in the Torah, the entire area was called Bashan, and the city of refuge is called Golan. So it's kind of a different hang of it than we have today. And in one of the translations of the Torah, it mentions, instead of Golan, it says Dabra, or Dalet Bet Resh He Aleph. And so there are many who believe that this village that we'll take a look at now, where they found the stone, is actually originally a city of refuge. So the name Sheila Boone comes from a village which was way at the bottom of this hiking trail at the Jordan River, right before the Jordan River. For those of you who've done the hike, which I suppose it's almost everybody, you go to an area where there's a lot of water, and there's an aqueduct, and and there was a village there called Jalabina. And next to it was a Syrian army camp, as many places along the border between Syria and Israel in the 19 years, between 48 and 67. The villages and the army bases were close to each other. And on the last day of the 6-day war, there was a battle there. And Yoni Netanyahu, famous for being the man who fell in the raid on Entebbe, he was wounded there. 4 hours before the ceasefire started, the man next to him was shot. He went to try to help him. and he was shot from above in the left elbow. It shattered his entire elbow. He crawled back under fire to the first aid station and fainted. They took him to Tzfat, to the hospital, and he went through 3 operations there and in Jerusalem. And he never really was able to straighten it, but that, of course, that didn't stop him from being like the most amazing soldier ever in the IDF. But at the time he was discharged, and that's when he decided, because he was wounded, to go to Harvard, where he excelled there, of course, also. But the place is known because of that last-minute battle before the ceasefire. So the name Jalabina, according to Zev Vilnai, who's a researcher, was a researcher of the land of Israel and everything that has to do with it, he claims that it comes from a certain bean that's mentioned in the Jerusalem Talmud called Gilbona, or Jalabina, Gilbona. Of course, my first reaction to this was jalapeno. That's got to be some connection there, but it turns out that jalapeno is named after the city in Mexico, but well, almost. But for the Latin Jews out there, I'm still gonna look for the connection there. But Yoni was wounded there, and these are pictures you can find in his famous book, Michtavei Yoni. And so there was a battle there, but afterwards it really became a hiking spot. And this is the village of Dabura. Now we're back up on top, right? For Yoni, we went down to the bottom to understand where the name Jilabun comes from. But up on top of the Golan, at the beginning of the hike, above the waterfall that we saw called the Dvorah waterfall, is this place called Dabura, Dabra, Dvorah. We don't know what the source of it is. Is it connected to Dvorah, the prophetess? There's no connection that I know of, but that has been the name also in Arabic, because this was a Syrian Bedouin village for many years. In other words, in the beginning, it was Bedouins who came through, and they took some stones, put them together, and stayed there. And afterwards, the Syrians actually helped the Bedouin kind of settle near their army camps, as both also being support, as it were, supporting the army, sometimes growing food for them, giving goods and services. If you walk around there today, and I mean today, it will look like this. It's very thorny. Very few people go there, even though you have to leave the hiking trail. When you get to the Dvorah waterfall, you have to go up, and most people just want to go down to the Jordan. But you'll see a lot of globe thistles, the kipodan, the hedgehog, as we would call it in Hebrew, the purple thorny flowers that look like you just want to hug it, but you don't. And it's hard to walk around there because it has not been cleared out, and therefore it's a great place to find antiquities, coins, ancient stones, and that's exactly what happened back in 1967. Now let's talk about this man, this amazing man who discovered what may be the coolest stone ever. And here it is actually being found at the time, mamash, Shmariel Gutman. And a call out to all those Scottish Jews who may be with us now, because Shmaria Gutman, this amazing man who's best known for archaeology, was born in Scotland. How many Jews who live in Israel can say that? Not a lot. Of course, his family isn't from Scotland. They were from Russia. They left when the pogrom started, and they simply got to Scotland. And when he was 3, they moved to Israel. And Shmaria went to Mikveh Israel and learned to be a farmer. And he was one of the first members of a new youth movement that started called the Working Youth Movement, Hanoar Ha'oved. Afterwards, and still exists today, it's a kind of morphed into Hanoar Ha'oved Valomed, because you don't just want to work, you want to study too. But he was one of the very first members, and later he became the director, the national director. And the first kibbutz of this movement was Na'an, N-A-A-N, which is near Rehovot, still around today. And he moved there when he was 17, like this was the goal. He was very much into this youth movement. You know, working youth movement sounds very, very socialist, and it was. He married Sarah, had 3 kids, worked as a farmer, but then something happened. He got the itch to start hiking, and he was one of the first people to get to Masada. The first time he got there was in 1933 when he was 24. He was with a very special group of people who, this is hard to believe, but I'm going to say it anyway, who actually hiked all around the Dead Sea. Think about how hard that is with no logistical backup or cell phones, to hike all the way around the Dead Sea on both sides, to simply go around it is unbelievable. Very hard to do in any weather. And he did this when he was 24. And he, not only did he find a lot of things in Masada, but he understood the educational potential of this mountain. And he kept on going back to Masada, and he tried to get others to go back. Others in the kibbutz movement, most people thought he was crazy, but his own youth movement, of course, was with him in this because he was the national director, so he could do that. Look at this picture. This is an amazing picture. You know, today, who has ever hiked to Masada? You know, how many people can say, yeah, I walked to Masada? Nobody walks there. You take a bus there, or you take a car there. But think how hard this was back then to make this trek. I mean, imagine what would happen if somebody broke their leg, got bitten by a snake, got stung by a scorpion, ran out of water. It's unbelievably risky, but Shmaria understood the educational importance, and he was really a man who, he was one man, but he started the wheels turning on many, many things. This is in the end connected to the stone. I'll get to that, but it isn't also simply an opportunity to talk about this amazing man and what he did. So he tried to get people to come and dig at Masada, and he did that actually in the 1950s. And one of the things that he discovered was the snake path that everybody knows about today, even though not everybody walks on it, but that was discovered by him. He had the book of Josephus in his hands, and he looked for it, and he found it. And that is thanks to him. This is a group of his youth group, when he's already the director. They would come up to Masada and would leave their mark. Today, this wouldn't be cool, but people who've been in the big cistern in the south, the graffiti was left by his group. It was considered kosher graffiti. That's a whole different subject. But here they chiseled out and kind of painted their logo of their youth group. And they also left all kinds of verses at Masada. One of them from a famous poem called Masada by Lamdan, Pitchi mitzada sha'araich va'avoa hapalit. It's a very long, fascinating poem that doesn't interest most people today, but it was then a big thing about a man who's like representing the Jewish people, and Masada was representing the land of Israel. And after all, Lamdan had experienced personally a lot of loss during pogroms in the Ukraine. He came to Israel, and he wrote in his poem, Mitzada, open up your gates for me, and I will come in as a fugitive. And so this was, to go up to Masada was incredibly, incredibly moving, incredibly, incredibly hard. These were things that they left, although of course it's not considered cool today. Here's another great picture of Shmaria. He was also very key in getting Yigael Yadin to come and make the big excavation at Masada, which he did in the early 60s. And at the time, he was his assistant and was manager of the dig in the synagogue and along the wall. Afterwards, he went to England, studied archaeology, because before that, it was just stuff he picked up on the way and on his own. And one of the things that he researched was Hadrian's Wall. But he was really most interested in the Great Revolt. I see there's a question. Yes, please ask away. Or you could type away. Well, until 1 second. Lone Rosenberg, I hear there's a question there. Can you open up your mic?
If you're talking about me, no, I have no question.
Ellen, I'm sorry. So, okay. So, no problem. Anyway, in the 1930s, he was actually, before World War II really started, but just a few years before, he went to Poland, tried to get Jews to move to Israel. Obviously, anybody who came with him were the people who were spared. And in the early 40s, and this is really amazing, because he had learned Arabic, and he became an emissary, not to Poland, the area where his family came from, but to Iraq, where he tried to start a Jewish underground movement and help people move to Israel before the state of Israel. And he went a number of times back to Europe when it was starting to get, too close for comfort to help them, to help people move to Israel. He did that also after the war. But one of the amazing things is in 1945, he joined the intelligence unit of the Haganah and then moved on to the Palmach and was the first commander of a new unit that went undercover behind enemy lines. They dressed up as Arabs and spoke as Arabs. And when you think about it, look at this man. Here he is down here on the right. He kind of looks like Ben Gurion, very Ashkenazic looking. He was born in Scotland. How exactly did he dress up as an Arab? But he was able to do that, which is incredible. And so one of the amazing things that he did is during the war, towards the very end of the War of Independence in 1949, he initiated and led a boat that went with a unit to En-Gedi. And because he was very familiar with the area, thanks to him, one man who initiated this, En-Gedi, Masada, and the entire southern Judean desert became part of the new state of Israel. I mean, just imagine what would happen if he wasn't there, if he hadn't done that hike when he was young. This one man had done it all. We simply weren't able to get there. There was no road like there is today, Highway 90 that goes down there, but rather you could only get there by boat. And that was one of the amazing things that he did. Afterwards, he went back to Iraq in the 70s. He went to Kurdistan. He met with local rebels. He was simply either digging or going undercover, doing quiet stuff. But he'd always, the subject of his main interest was the Great Revolt. And it started at Masada, and he knew that there was a city called Gamla, and he wanted to get to the Golan Heights, but of course it was impossible. And right after 1967, it was decided that there would be two groups of archaeologists that would go, and they would do what was called the emergency survey in the Golan Heights. And all the areas that were taken by Israel after 1967, there were groups of archaeologists who went immediately to find what was interesting, take a picture of it, write it down, try to find as much as they could, because it wasn't a known thing that these tracts of land would stay and be part of the state of Israel. And so it was called the emergency survey. So he, of course, wanted to go to the Golan Heights because one of the main reasons that he said, the reason that I want to go is not only, of course, to write all of this down and find new things, I want to find Gamla. And he wasn't able to do it until a little later when someone else who was doing a survey and a landscaping thought that he saw Gamla and recognized it from what he saw and what Josephus wrote, and he got in contact with Shmaria, who came up and then dug at Gamla for 14 years and discovered this amazing city, which for him was his dream work. And here he is at Gamla talking to a group He still worked a lot with the kibbutz movement, and those were the people who got out there and hiked. You can see the place is totally pristine. It's even before they started any serious digging, and he was there for 14 years, and died in 1996 at the age of 87. Once, when I was working in Gush Etzion, there was a conference, and he was going to talk about the Great Revolt. And someone had to go and bring him, and I said, "Can I do it, please?" And I got to take the car and go down to Kibbutz Nan, and he let me into his house, and he said, "Here, have some cookies and some tea." I met his wife. He was a famous, legendary guy then, and very simple, very humble, very simple kibbutz home, so nice. And I got to, ask him 10,000 questions on the way up to the Gush and on the way back when I dropped him off. That was a lot of fun. Just the last picture, also kind of famous, when he's already in his early 80s, I think, or late 70s, he's finding a huge piece of pottery in a huge jar in Gamla, walking around with that archaeologist trouble there. So here he is back. It's the second week of the emergency survey in the Golan Heights, and it's breakfast time. They haven't even started yet. They get to Dabura, and they're sitting there having breakfast. And while they're having breakfast, he spots this big stone, and he goes over to the building, and they find a ladder there because the Bedouins who were there during the war simply escaped back to Syria, to what is today Syria. And this was their mosque. They had taken the stones, a lot of field stones. Some of them were nice stones. They used cement. One of the ways that you can tell when you get to Dabura, if you do go there, that the ancient homes didn't use cement. It was dry building, big rocks, beautiful. Every one has been worked on. And the newer building is actually much more simpler, quickly put together. They threw on some cement, but they used as a lintel stone at the entrance to the mosque. They took a stone that was already there, and they thought it looked nice, and they put it there. And here Shmaryahu is going over there, and he sees they put plaster in the middle, and he realizes this is something really ancient. And everybody was incredibly excited, of course. Let's take a look at the stone from up close. As I said, today you can see it in Katrin, the Archaeological Museum. And for those who can't see well, the actual engraving, it's a huge stone, and there's also a drawing here to make it easier. And in Hebrew it says, if you follow, it actually starts inside the wreath here, and it says, Ze bet midrasho she lerabi Eliezer hakapar. This terminology of she lerabi was used in ancient times, and it's not strange, it's just strange to us. And here you can see Eliezer HaKapar over on the left-hand side. And in English, this is the Bet Midrash of Rabbi Eliezer HaKapar. Now that's pretty cool. They found a stone with a man's name on it, which in itself is very rare, but they also found what it was. It wasn't necessarily in place, but it meant that very close by, because how far can you schlep this stone? It had to be somewhere nearby. Maybe even it was very, very close to where the mosque was. And there was a Bet Midrash there. That's incredible. And of course, Shmarya, knowing the Jewish sources very well, understood that this is a man who's mentioned often, a number of times, in the Talmud and in the Midrash. Most of the time he's mentioned as Rabbi Elazar HaKapar. And actually the only time he's called Eliezer is on this stone, which is really interesting, but it simply could be two ways of spelling it. There's also a famous rabbi named Bar Kapara, and some people think this might be him. More people think that's probably the son of this man. And it could be that this stone means that Rabbi Eliezer HaKapar sat in the building, that the entrance stone was this lintel stone. By the way, not everybody agrees with that, because this man lived somewhere around the 3rd century, beginning of the 3rd century. And this stone, they think perhaps was maybe from the 4th century. Some people believe that instead of Rabbi Eliezer Kapar actually living here and teaching here, perhaps it was simply a place where his school of thought was taught. Just like Bet Shammai and Bet Hillel, after Shammai and Hillel passed away, they continued to be Bet Shammai and Bet Hillel with the spirit of their teachers there. So because Rabbi Eliezer Kapar is mentioned, he's once walking on the coast, and then it says he lived in the south, and sometimes it says he's in the north, then we're not 100% sure, we, the greater we, are not 100% sure that actually he lived here and he taught here. It could be, but it could also be that it was his school of thought. Stopping now to look at the chat. Yes, okay, so it's a very good question. Ruchama, thank you. How do they know the stone is 4th century? It's a guess, because it turns out that there are many other stones with a similar motif nearby, and those could be more or less dated. And let's take a look at some of the other stones that they found right next to this stone. By the way, we'll get back to this and talk about the motifs that we see here, the 2 birds and everything else, but let's just move on in order to answer Ruchama's excellent question. Okay, this stone is lost. We don't know where it is, but in Dabura, it was recorded by another archaeologist who came a couple years later and found another lintel stone with 2 birds eating snakes. Okay, and it seems that this motif may have been around the same time. And not only that, and we'll get to, these are things that we'll come back to in a moment, just to answer the question, another stone that was found in Dabura, and only recently, a few years ago, they took it out of the wall. It actually fell down because of an earthquake, a tremor, and they brought it to Katsrin. Now it's in Katsrin in the Archaeological Museum. Another bird, this time has a wreath in its mouth and 2 fish there. And in Aramaic, it says to the left up on top, you can't see it, it's written in small letters, made this gate. In other words, it's a dedication engraving. Somebody paid for the gate to a village, the other side of the Beit Midrash, a synagogue. This is simply half of the lintel stone that was there. And again, down in the riverbed, those who were walking in Boone, who like to walk in the water and not on the path near it, you can actually see when you're underneath Dabura, this is a rock that fell down from ancient Dabura, again with the same motif. So to answer your question, Ruchama, we don't know for sure. It's a guess using the inexact method of artistic motif, and most of the coins and shards that were found there were from the 4th century. But the truth is, very little can be proven about what happened here. It's a lot of guesswork. So let's go back because I do want to talk about a couple of the motifs that we have here, because it is really something special. And of course, we're going to talk about those birds and about those snakes. How can we not talk about snakes? Bear with me here as I traverse backwards. We're taking a look at some of the motifs on the stone itself. So the first thing that we see on the stone is that there's 2 birds. They look like they're eating snakes, and the snakes' tails or heads are wound up together in a what looks like a square knot, and then it makes a wreath. Okay, so the wreath in early Roman, not only in early Roman, but it started in early Roman art in Israel. In Europe, it started already with the Greeks. There would be wreaths as a sign of respect, a sign of this is a very special place. And the square knot and the wreath go together, as we'll see in a number of lintel stones. It meant it was monumental. The wreath is like you're entering a monumental place, and kind of like almost a royal place, a special place, maybe a holy place. The Herculean Knot, which was used in weddings in the pagan world, and perhaps is how they got the term, we're going to tie the knot. This was a square knot, which was very symbolic in specifically in Europe, but it made its way here in art. And you can see it, for instance, here. This is in Marot, in the Galilee, in the Upper Galilee. They found an entrance stone, also to apparently a synagogue, where if you look carefully, you have two birds, but somebody came and was very upset and chiseled out everything in the bird except for the belly. So you can kind of have to imagine there being wings on each side, and we have a wreath, and underneath it, we have the same Herculean knot, the special knot. And here they chiseled out, again, the incredibly beautiful artwork, but the writing was like, they got an F in handwriting, and it just doesn't fit, but it didn't bother them back then. And here it says very beautifully, the verse from Dvarim, Baruch atah bevoecha, uvaruch atah betzetecha. What a great inscription to put on a lintel stone to a synagogue. Blessed be you as you come in, blessed be you also as you exit. The lintel stone, of course, in Hebrew, mashkof, is the first time we hear about it is in the Exodus story, when the Jews are told to put the blood of the lamb against the plague, to put it on the lintel stone and on the mezuzot, on the doorposts on the side. The mashkof, from the word in Hebrew, to look out, it looks out. It's something that's monumental and looks out at you, and you, of course, look at it. And it was like you're entering a special place. Take a moment. This is a special place. This is from Chorazin. If in the middle is what looks like a heichalit. We talked about this when we talked about Ein Shatot. But here you have a wreath, and at the bottom you have a Herculean knot. It's a thing. And this is in Katrin. I couldn't find a better picture. But here also you have two amphoras on the side, a wreath, and a Herculean knot that you can barely see at the bottom. So going back, you can see here that there is a wreath. It looks, though, that the wreath is made out of two snake heads, because you can see two eyes. But that would mean that the birds are eating the tails of the snake, which is kind of weird. But here it looks almost as if they're also eating the heads, as if the snakes have two heads. I know this doesn't really matter to most people, but for whatever reason, it interests me. It looks very much that we're talking about a specific bird that we have in Israel. It's not just in Israel, it's in Europe also, pretty common. You can see it commonly in Israel, specifically in the summer. This is a great picture by Yoram Shpirer that he took a little over 10 years ago of a short-toed eagle, also known as the snake eagle, who is eating. I tried to get the least gross picture as possible because I figure people are after dinner. I hope not before. But this is a tsefa, this is a viper, and this bird has a lot of adaptations, a lot of gifts. This bird got from the creator to be able to deal with snakes. For instance, it can digest a poisonous snake, and the venom doesn't affect it. It simply gets dissolved in its gut. It also has other things that make it a great snake hunter. This bird, about 80% of its diet is snakes. Now, if there are no snakes, he'll eat other things, other reptiles, lizards, but if there's nothing there, he'll eat frogs and mice. Also, I won't go into more detail in case people don't want to talk about that. This is something, Lior Kislev, who took this picture, is also a guide who lives in the Golan. He is an expert birder. He actually does birding hikes for people who come from all over the world to get their list checked off. And he caught something which is very rare, and that is a chivyai, which is Aramaic for that of the snake. That's how we call the bird in Hebrew. The short-toed eagle, or the snake eagle, eating a snake as it's flying. You can imagine how surprised the snake was. You know, all of its life was probably on the ground, and then all of a sudden it's like, hey, I'm flying. And then I'm dead. I'm being eaten. So I have maybe seen in many, many years, maybe 3 or 4 times, if you ever see a bird eating spaghetti in the sky, you're talking about the short-toed eagle. And it's rare to find them actually doing this, because they'll often eat them on the ground, but you got to be good at it, because if you don't, the snake will get you. This is a young bird who made a big mistake. I said mistake by mistake. Great picture by Yoel Ronen. This did not end well. Nobody got killed, but they were both hurt, and nobody got eaten by the other. But this is a young bird that didn't catch the snake right and stayed too long with it. This is a classic picture. You actually see this a lot among, I think this will be the grossest of all the pictures for those who are afraid I'm going to show something worse. I guess the title of this would be "Quit Playing with Your Food" or whatever. But the adult is coming back, and the adults are now, you know, making sure that the little fledglings there have dinner, and I'll leave it at that. Look at this bird, okay? Usually, of all the birds, for instance, take a falcon or a kestrel. They will be able to stand, as it were, in midair and flap their wings, and if they see something, they'll go swoop down and eat it. But the chivyai, the snake eagle, is actually able to spread its wings out and not flap, using the wind going in the opposite direction, and it's able to then not make any movement and be able to surprise snakes down below. Now, their face is very much like an owl's face, and it's kind of mushed in a way so that they have binocular vision, different than other eagles. And most importantly are the claws. Let's take a look at it. It's called the short-toed eagle because if you compare it with other eagles and other vultures even, you can see over here on the right, the short-toed eagle has short claws. It's really not short-toed. A better name would be short-clawed, but nobody asked me. But if we go over here to the osprey, you can see that the osprey, of course, catches fish and has to pull them out of the water. They need really, really strong and long nails. But an osprey would have a big problem catching a snake because its claws are simply too long and the snake would slither away. By having short claws, the eagle is able to actually grab and pierce the snake, which then will, if not kill it, it will simply make sure that it is weak. And if you take a look at the actual skin, you can see that another adaptation, another gift that this bird has is that it has much more scales, scalier scales, and more scales than the other birds by far. You can see that if it makes a mistake, let's say it's a young bird, and catches it the wrong way, not close enough to the head, and the bird turns around and gives it a bite, there's a chance that it will be able to survive if the teeth do not pierce this very, very tough, these very, very tough scales. If it does pierce it, the bird will die. So that's pretty much the story of the short-toed eagle. And what really is amazing is that when standing at Dabura and throughout the hike, if you're hiking in the summer, which almost everybody is at Sheila Boone, you will be able to see the short-toed eagle because they nest and they fly around the area. And of course, it's known that the Golan has no lack of snakes in the summer. And so you can almost kind of understand why these people use this on 2 lintel stones, because it's something that they saw. And it was like the magnificence of nature. And it's, of course, our guess why they would put it at the entrance to a Bet Midrash or a synagogue, but they were simply perhaps using things from nature. Moving right along, I will say goodbye to the birds and the snakes, and we'll move on to the idea of kapar. We don't really know what hakapar means, if we could call it Rabbi Eliezer's last name. What does kapar mean? So we have a number of chachamim, of sages, who were called by their profession or their family's profession. So for instance, some of the more famous people that are mentioned in the Talmud, Choni ha-Me'agel, who took the rolling stone and got the extra moisture out of the rooftops. We have Rabbi Yochanan HaSandlar, who was a sandal maker. We have Rabbi Yehuda Nasi, who was the president of the Sanhedrin. Rabbi Zcharia ben Akatzav, who perhaps was a butcher or his father was a butcher. Rabbi Chutzpit HaMeturgaman, who was a translator or someone who knew the text by heart. Rabbi Yitzchak Nafcha apparently was a blacksmith. So what does a kapar do? If kapar is a profession, it would mean that Rabbi Eliezer HaKapar and or his family dealt with capers. And there's a lot you can do with capers. I don't know if I would suggest someone to do this for a full-time job, but you can eat capers, you can pickle them. They're very yummy, antioxidants, all that kind of stuff, but they also made wine from capers. And There are many different passages, both in the Tanakh and in the Talmud, that talk about the very different parts of the caper bush, and even the name caper and kapar from the Greek kaparis, and even the island of Cyprus may all actually be connected, and all around the Mediterranean, countries around the Mediterranean Sea. This grows all over the place. If you take a look, this flower, incredibly beautiful flower, it blooms one day. And the idea is to pick the buds before it blooms as close as you can to the blooming, because it'll be bigger, and then you pickle it. If it opens up, you can't take it anymore. You have to wait till the flower wilts, as you can see up here on the top left, and then it becomes a fruit, which looks like a little tiny watermelon, and you can pickle that too. And all of these things can be used to make a kind of caper wine, which I couldn't find anybody in today's world who's still doing that. Although there are a lot of people making wine sauce from capers and eating it with fish and all kinds of recipes, things that are way out of my league as far as food goes. But this is a very good chance that this could be his family's profession. This is what they look like after you pickle them. And for those of you on Israel Guides, just a couple of days ago, Frankie Snyder put out a great recipe for doing this, which I've got to try myself. And they're great in salads. And of course, every single big bush that you see in the kotel, it's all caper bushes. All of these big bushes are capers. There's other plants also that grow in the kotel. There was a great article by Professor Felix Alav Shalom in his book Nature and the Bible, in both Hebrew and English, that he takes a picture or a drawing of the kotel and actually mentions all the different plants that grow in the kotel. For those who are in Jerusalem a lot, it's a great article. But definitely the bushes that you see from afar that are big, those are capers. They need very little. They do well with very, very little. And of course, it is a symbolic plant because, as it says in the Talmud, it is very resilient. So for instance, here, take a look in the Golan. This is almost every summer, there's fires in the Golan. This year, there'll probably be a few less because there's fewer hikers to make mistakes. But what happens is the fire is a brush fire, right? It can't be a forest fire. We don't really have huge forests here. And it comes through and it gets to the caper bush, and the leaves are very, very thick. The green leaves are thick, and the brush fire that's blowing through does not burn the green leaves. However, last year's branches and leaves are underneath it, and the years before are also underneath it, and that gets burned. So what happens is, if you go to the Golan after a fire, or this is actually a year after a fire, where I just happened to find this picture, you can see that you'll have nothing, or you'll have black, and then a little island of life, this caper bush which survived. Here's a picture from 2006. There was a big fire, and even though this picture doesn't really do justice to the idea, you'll see that the green of the caper bush actually stays. And this fits very much into the story that we have been telling for thousands of years, the verses that are told about Moshe, who gets his life mission, and he's out as a shepherd on Mount Sinai or near it, and he sees a burning bush, and the bush was burning, but the bush was not consumed. And there's a possibility that we're talking about this very phenomena. The bush is burning, in other words, the under part of it is burning, but the bush itself, the green part, is not consumed. I'm not saying that it wasn't a miracle, and it probably was more amazing than the way I'm describing it, but it definitely fits this idea of something not being consumed. So it became a symbol for the Jewish people.
Is it thorny? Is it thorny?
Incredibly thorny. It's very thorny, yes. And that, of course,
that fits with the midrash as well.
Yes, and definitely, sometimes we're a little stiff-necked, so maybe being, thorny kind of fits that. But the thorns on the, if you go back to the actual bush, the thorns point inward instead of outward like most thorns. And the actual midrash that Rabbi Yehuda is talking about is that you can, just like the Jewish people went into Egypt very easily, and we were invited, but when we tried to leave, we couldn't. You can put your hand into a bush and it won't hurt, but when you try to take it out, it will be very painful. And if you try that when you're with a group or on your own, you will see it's really easy to put your hand in, very hard to take it out. Some people say it's kind of like relationships. Very easy to start, very hard to end. But the Midrash definitely says that this is like the history of the Jewish people. So here we have a bush that represents the Jewish people, also because it's resilient. There's something about this bush that when you cut it down, it will grow back bigger than it was before. It secretes a growth hormone like many other bushes that will just come back even stronger. And this became a symbol for the Jewish people. And the famous saying in the Talmud, there are three, Rabbi Shimon ben Lakish said, there are three that are resilient: the Jewish people among the nations, the dog among the animals, the rooster among the birds, and some say also the goat among the grazing animals, and some say also the caper bush among the trees. So I know it doesn't sound very, respectful to compare us to some of those other animals, but in the resilient part, I think that's supposed to be some kind of a compliment. And so perhaps it's very fitting that this Lintel Stone, which notes Rabbi Eliezer HaKapar, who may have been a caper man, if I could call him that, the stone itself was resilient enough to last centuries of neglect, misplacement, only to be discovered by Shmaria and the archaeologist when the return of the Jewish people to his Bet Midrash in the 20th century. Because of this, the Ne'ot Kedumim Park near the airport, for those who have been there, really an amazing place, they decided to use the flower of the caper bush as their symbol. Now, it should be noted, not everybody agrees that the biblical botanists, there are some who believe that the burning bush was actually a raspberry bush. And there are verses and sayings that can back that up, but Noga Reuveni, who's the man who started in Ne'ot Kedumim and wrote many books on, specifically on biblical botany, felt that it simply fit the Jewish people and fit his organization, who's trying to bring back the ancient agriculture and culture in general of the Jewish people as they return to their land. I wanted to finish with what, in my opinion, is the most fascinating thing about this rock. And for that, we have to actually go and hear what are some of the teachings that Rabbi Eliezer HaKapar said in the Talmud. There's at least 20 things that he said that are fascinating, and I want to just share a couple of them with you. Some of them are very famous, and some of them are not very well known. So he talked about a lot about peace, about shalom. Great is shalom, and it's of great importance, and perhaps a hint that maybe he did make wine from capers. He said the famous saying that is quoted a lot on Purim, wine goes in, secrets come out. Wine, which equals 70, goes in, and secrets, which equals 70, comes out. Yain, Yud Yud Nun, the gematria is 70. Sod, Samach Vav Daled, is also 70. So in other words, watch it, guys. Watch. If you have secrets, if you're drinking wine, don't think that you're going to keep them in. And he said other things: love peace, hate divisiveness, very beautiful things. But then he said something that specifically refers to the stone. And he says the following. He says, in the end, all the study halls, the Batei Midrash that are in Babylonia, will be established in the land of Israel. That's a very, very fascinating saying, but he actually is talking about Batei Midrash. And he's talking, if not the actual Batei Midrash, the schools of thought. And that is a whole different conversation. What is the difference between the Torah of the Jews of Babylonia? I don't mean the book, I mean the ways of study, the values that are learned, the kind of study, and the way things are taught of the Jews of Babylonia vis-a-vis the learning the Torah of the land of Israel. And he says in the future, the synagogues and study halls of Babylonia will be established in the land of Israel. And that's pretty amazing that this man whose Bet Midrash is mentioned on the stone was actually found in Israel. And of course, we'll finish with perhaps the most famous, amazing thing that he said, which I can't understand why it should be a huge poster. And everybody in Israel should know this, but it's almost like a secret. But in Avot Rabbi Natan, which is a relatively recent compared to the others, Midrash, he said the following: "Do not be like the upper lintel stone, which no hand can reach." I want to repeat this. Rabbi Eliezer HaKapar talked about lintel stones. Do not be like the upper lintel stone, which no hand can reach, and not like the upper doorpost stone that hits one in the face. He had a sense of humor. And not like the middle doorpost stone that hits one in the legs, but rather be like the lower entrance stone on which everyone steps. And in the end, the entire building falls down, but the lower entrance stone will always be in place. Take a look at this picture we talked about a few weeks ago, Enk Shatot. Here's a synagogue that simply fell down. There was a huge earthquake in the 8th century. Look what happened. Everything fell down. In 1905, Cohen Watziger came and actually took this picture. Now look what happened. This is the actual entrance from the south into the synagogue of Enk Shatot. And look what happened. Here's the lintel stone. It fell down. Look at the upper and lower doorposts. They're just about to fall down. You can see, you wouldn't want to stand next to them, because that thing falls down, you're going to, whatever it falls on, it's going to be hard to get from underneath that rock again. But look what stayed. The stone that you step on in order to get in. Unbelievable. And just a few miles away is where they actually found his lintel stone, which was standing. What can be more amazing than that? And here, I think, kind of summing up in a picture what Rabbi Eliezer HaKapar is talking about. He's leaving us with an incredible idea talking about humility. And he's simply using stones that everybody sees when they walk into a synagogue or a Bet Midrash. And of all the stones, of all the people to be found, it was Rabbi Eliezer HaKapar's stone, his lintel stone, which was actually found. I find that to be amazing, because usually when you find a stone, it's like, this is cool. Archaeologically, this is amazing. You find someone's name on it, that's even more amazing. But here, we're talking about a stone that teaches a Jewish value. How many stones can you say teach you a value? And such a beautiful value that is so important, always was and always will be, the idea of humility. Think of all the strife that could be prevented by people simply being humble. And there's a saying from Masechet Eruvin that says, anyone who humbles himself, Hashem will exalt. Anyone who exalts himself, Hashem will humble. Anyone who chases after greatness, greatness runs away. Anyone who runs away from greatness, greatness chases. Rabbi Eliezer HaKapar has been chased by his own humility. And I think that's a huge, huge lesson, that it isn't just a stone. This is a stone with a deep message. So if I had to vote, I would say, coolest stone ever found. I'm not sure everybody would agree with me, but it is a pretty cool stone. And you can see it today in Katzrin. And actually, if you're kind of a little mashugana like me, you can actually buy a little replica of that stone in the Katzrin Museum, in an ancient Katzrin. I brought this home because I like looking at it. I think my family thought it was a little weird, but it's just like, it's a reminder, you know, because you can look at the stone, you immediately understand all the things that we talked about that actually it's representing. Thank you for being with us today. And I want to apologize for those who last week were here and it didn't work. Continuing.
Comments?
Yes, comments. Monastery at Santa Catarina in Sinai shows caper bush as Moses burning bush. Yafeh.
Ooh.
And yes, I agree. It is strange that we use the word salaf for it. It's really fascinating and interesting also that in Masechet Brachot, it goes through all the different parts of and gives different names, the different parts of the caper bush. Also mentioned in Kohelet in the very end. Very, very fascinating. But I personally, of course, I don't think there's any question that the burning bush is a caper bush. But I have to say, there have been some folks who've written about the raspberry bush, and there's a few good points there. But at least educationally wise, I think, when people see a raspberry bush, they think raspberries. When you see a caper bush, it's like, yeah, that's okay in salad. You can focus on the value instead of just the food.